Welcome to the week 5 lecture. This week we're talking about generative AI in audio and music. Just as we've seen AI use in photography and video, music is being fundamentally altered in Gen AI, basically changing the ear of the composer and the producer into something different. It's being constructed daily and shifting the musical landscape from a model of manual creation to one of algorithmic orchestration, which is a bit of a mouthful. The reality is anyone can generate a voiceover or a musical sequence through generative AI. And while that's helpful, what's most important is establishing your, what I call sonic DNA, because that's the one thing a machine cannot replicate. Now, when we think of generative AI in audio, we usually break it down into two categories by what it does: music or voice. So music is more structural logic to create melodies, rhythms, and full song structures, while voice is more expressive, and it's trying to replicate the timbre, emotion, and nuance of speech. Gen AI has got very good at both, however. Now, to understand first, though, the workflow, first I want to kind of talk about some of the tools that are out there, and there are tons of voice and music tools out there. Again, much as I said throughout this course, the prompts matter. What you're putting in for information and context really matters in terms of your output. But there are some great tools. In music generation, probably my favorite is Suno or Udio, but there are lots of other ones as well. In voice and narration, there's lots of ones that basically can create scratch VOs from a text prompt, also temporary narration, or basically voice conversion, basically making a voice sound different, maybe making my voice sound like an English accent or something. 11 Labs is especially good at voice and narration. Then the final category is sound design. This is kind of like the end process where you might be adding sound effects, you might be doing cleanup things like noise reduction or track isolation, things like that. The thing I would say with any tool is work in pieces. What you're trying to create is a variety of 20 to 30 second cues that work, and then you can build those together. But don't try to find that perfect 3 to 4 minute song, because that'll take a long time to output. Music. So music focuses on the composition and arrangement of sounds. And we've seen this AI music evolve from elevator music to produce professional grade tracks with really emotional depth and complexity. Part of the reason for this is they're trained on vast data sets of musical theory, rhythm, and genre-specific patterns. Because of that data, they really can create true music. And they've become so successful nowadays and popular, it's really hard to tell real music from the fake. An example of this was last year, a band called the Velvet Sundown. In June of 2025, they suddenly appeared on Spotify and other platforms and just immediately amassed 1 million monthly listeners, which is kind of surprising for a band that no one had heard of, no one had seen, anything like that. And they had some nice kind of 1970s inspired folk and indie rock music, but some journalists and critics were kind of wondering, well, why wasn't there a history for them? Why were there no live show dates? Why was there no physical presence, which became suspicious? And then after some pressure, a spokesperson admitted that Velvet Sundown was an art hoax created entirely with generative AI. What they said was they claimed to see if it was a test to see if listeners could tell the difference between the human soul of music and machine logic. But I don't buy that. The point I'm making here, however, is that it's sometimes very hard to tell real music created by humans versus AI music. Music composition is kind of a hybrid generative AI model. And there are processes that you follow to get the best output. First, you start with an LLM. It could be Gemini, ChatGPT, some of the ones I listed there below, Suno, Udio, Avia. And you're basically breaking it down into digital units of audio. And they're predicting what's going to come next. So because LLMs are good at structural coherence, they kind of know what makes sense from start to finish. They know that a melody in the first 30 seconds can be brought back later as a refrain. They know that there might have to be a bridge in the middle of the song. They know a song will come to a kind of an end at the at the very ending, maybe a big glorious ending or something that's more muted. Um, and Avaya is probably the most established of the AI composers rather, but I love Suno and Udio as well. So you do that with an LLM to kind of figure out stuff, but you can also use a diffusion model. And these start, like we talked before, we talked about images, they start with digital noise, and they basically gradually refine it into recognizable sound. Stable audio is a big one, Refusion's another one. They use those tools to create rich atmospheric and realistic vocals. They're also really good at like giving a certain style or tone to instruments. So think about what a violin sounds like. Well, there's all different types of violin, and they can change it by the type of wood in the violin, the bow it's being used, maybe the reverb that's happening through the violin. So you can get a really distinct sound from it, which is great. If you want to think about the difference between the two, and you can use both in music, think of LLMs as the composer and diffusion as the instrument. But like I said, it's a hybrid model where you can use both. There you go, composer and instrument. I mentioned that I like Suno. It's one of the industry standards from text to song generation. So that LLM kind of thing where you just input what you want to have, the prompt, and it comes out with stuff. It's great for complete commercial grade songs. Other things will give you like an electronic beat or a loop of music. This is great for something that once has vocals, instrumentation, and lyrics. And you can get a result in seconds from a single prompt. I was working on something a little while ago that I really enjoyed. It was kind of a fun song that came forward, and I thought it sounded pretty good. I'm going to try to play it here. We'll see if it plays here on this or not.
Sunsets low on a dusty old road. Palm trees sway where the trade winds blow. Tiny waves kiss the sand.
So an all AI song, that was literally the result I got with one prompt. I will find it some more from there, but it's amazing what you can create with Suno. For music prompting, here are some of the things that you're kind of looking at when you're prompting. And the goal with a lot of this stuff is to make sure the music sounds more human than feels robotic. You don't want a music track that's mathematically perfect because that's got to feel emotionally flat. And you look at these things. So you give things like the purpose in your prompting, the emotion you're looking for. 2 to 3 adjectives is fine. Genre references certainly help. Instrumentation, you don't want to go more than 6 instruments. Less is better of what you want it to be. So like if you had like a acoustic guitar, drums, and maybe a piano, that's a perfect kind of instrumentation, simple, and it won't all blend together. The tempo and meter you want to establish, the structure in terms of, an intro, a build, maybe a chorus, a peak, and then finally a release at the end. And then some notes you might do that might necessarily not be in the first version, that might be in other prompts going forward about other notes you want to kind of get across there. But all these are important to really make the music sound more human. The development process for music and for voice as well, but basically it's really important that you establish a brief. What I mean by a creative brief or whatever is what you want to do. What you're establishing, all the things we just mentioned in the music prompting on the last slide there. It helps the AI know what you're actually trying to establish. And you see there a list of various things would do there, including the deliverables. You want to have the deliverables in there as well. What kind of length, alternate endings, if there's stems for it, things like that. The next piece is you generate. And you can generate 5 to 10 versions very quickly. And then label them. And then pick the best 2 and then go ahead and reversion or iterate from there on that. But you want to generate a few things first so you can go through and decide which one you like the best. Finally, you deliver it. And that's going to be trimming to the exact length, equalization for clarity, and getting rid of any harshness type of thing, adding fades, normalized loudness. You can use Sound Design AI for this, or you can use application like Pro Tools, which is a great sound design software as well. And then you export the files out to go ahead and listen to. Voice, on the other hand, is focusing on speech and vocal performance. And it's come a long way from the voices that we thought of like Siri, which were very robotic. And we have voices that really have emotion and breath and, intonation, just impressive sounding voices out there. And common uses include such things as voice synthesis, which is text to speech. So you get in that LLM model, you write something in there, a script, and they go ahead and pop out something for you. And those are great for audiobooks, podcasts, or video games. There's also a thing called voice cloning, which is a digital replica of a person's voice from just a few minutes of audio. This can be used really especially for things like personalizing content for certain people, like if you want to have an audience and personalize their name or other kinds of things about them across the board. Or dubbing in multiple languages can also be helpful for. The final one is vocal transformation that we see a lot of, which is voice to voice. This is changing a producer's own singing voice into a different virtual vocalist, so making me sound like Madonna or whatever, while maintaining the original melody and timing. It's incredible what you can do with some of this vocal transformation out there. Voice generation also has a 2-stage pipeline, much like we did for music. And we use both LLMs and diffusion models to do that. LLMs read the text and predict which words need emphasis and emotional subtext. They're basically creating these acoustic tokens, much like in music notes, words for, the voice here. And it creates a mathematical map of the speech. If you're doing voice cloning, for example, it looks at reference audio, understands the target's speech patterns, their accent, their pauses, how fast they talk. They use and ah types of things. It'll determine all those kinds of things. Then for voice cloning, that would be a diffusion model. They're basically getting a digital fingerprint of the target voice, which is called speaker embedding. And that will to ensure the sound has the exact timbre or color of the original voice, breadth, brightness, depth, maybe their rasp, all those things, the original person. And then they basically then create a new version of that from those original kind of embedded digital fingerprint that they have of the voice. If you want to think about the difference between the two, you can think of the LLM as the director and the diffusion model as the actor. That's kind of a way to do it. But again, hybrid model, we use both for those. Use cases. Well, AI is being used in all sorts of things, I already kind of mentioned. The biggest thing is just being able to generate high quality audio faster, cheaper, and more scalable, and generate a lot of it. So an audiobook that might take 4, 5, 6 hours in a voiceover booth at a post-production house might be able to be knocked out in 30 minutes to an hour type of thing, and you're ready to go and instantly upload it. So there's huge advantages for the scalability and cost component for using Gen AI. I'll mention 11 Labs in a second here, but a lot of different things you can be doing: audiobooks, voiceovers, marketing campaigns, dubbing into different languages. The thing we see a lot of is all those customer service kinds of call center things, or hold things that you have online or on phones can be all AI generated now. Voice cloning can replicate an author's or narrator's style. But as I mentioned before, quick production of entire books, multilingual versions, and also affordable publishing for indie authors and publishers. That's the biggest thing, that you can go ahead and anyone can basically create this stuff. For example, Apple's used digital narration for accessibility on all their products to go ahead and get that done. Creators clone voices for consistent series output. Lots of different things. The voiceovers I kind of hit there. We have the brands like Agoda that generate localized voiceovers in multiple languages from one script, which is great. Lots of different things for advertising and marketing campaigns. Oreo is a good example. They had a Say It with the Oreo campaign where they cloned celebrity voices for interactive responses that people could have when they're actually interacting with the website type of thing, which is cool. So, and jingles and other kinds of spots, again, advantage on that. We talked about dubbing. The Respeecher Gen AI tool clones voices for films. So they've used it, for example, with Alec Guinness's voice of Star Wars, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Past and everything, they want to recreate his voice. James Earl Jones, who played Darth Vader, his voice being recreated in films and other things. So we see that kind of thing happening a lot. And then customer service, I kind of talked about that as well. 11 Labs, for me, is probably one of the best voice agents out there. The gold standard as far as I'm concerned. They're dominated the vocal and speech space by really getting into vocal acting, per se. They have a performance level where you can go ahead and not just read words, but you can increase the emotional subtext, the pauses, the speed, things like that. And then one interesting thing they got into is they got into licensing of famous voices. So they have the voices of John Wayne, Burt Reynolds, Michael Caine, Judy Garland that you can use in your stuff. And they have those licensed so you can use them in whatever you're working on. They're also working in the music realm a little bit. They just released an album with famous voices like Liza Minnelli and Art Garfunkel of Simon and Garfunkel, basically creating AI-generated songs. We'll be interested to see where that goes. But from a voice standpoint, voice generation standpoint,
Movie magic without the mayhem. Magic without the mayhem.
Hopefully you heard that, but that was the something I created just simply for my tagline for my company with a British accent of a guy. Thought it was interesting. Use cases. We talked about voiceovers and things like that. One of the big things that generative AI is being used for in voice is podcasting. One of the more recent examples was the 100 CEOs podcast. And it's kind of has a two sides to it type of thing. Basically, what that did is they would take, the 100 CEOs podcast would take hundreds of thousands of pages of interviews and articles and information about a specific CEO and write a 30-minute narrative about that CEO. But then they create a voice clone of that CEO to provide the narration. So you're basically doing these interviews with the CEO, living or dead, creating a voice for them and having them speak about what they've done there. So kind of feel different ways about it. It was interesting kind of test case to be able to do this and bring a famous CEO to life or one that didn't want to be on, but we still like that human to human connection. It kind of feels a little uncanny valley-ish, a little weird sometimes. I would say that I think AI is best as an informational tool rather than trying to create an emotional anchor from it. Use cases, again, segments, ambiance, cleaning up stuff. It provides a production team for a podcast. All the grunt work that you might have to do can be done with AI, which is great. Little stinger segments, a brand package to have there. But with like any kind of generative AI type of thing, you've got to put constraints on it to make it work. And the biggest thing is being able to have that consistency. We talked about that sonic DNA. You want to make sure it comes across the same sound DNA cue thing so it sounds the same thing. Loudness, consistency, does it sound the same audio level? Doesn't jump scare certain people? That's a problem. And then I think it's always important, and anytime you're using AI, is basically disclosing that you are using it. An example of that was the Joe Rogan Experience. There was a fan that basically used AI to generate episodes of a clone Joe Rogan voice, where he interviewed people that he had never met, like Steve Jobs, or talking to Donald Trump in fictional scenarios. He did interview him, but not on certain subjects. So he created these things. It was very convincing that one of the issues we had was that, okay, you had a real podcast in the Joe Rogan Experience with a knockoff. So what's the right for publicity? What's the copyright issues on those things? Rogan himself discussed these things, kind of talked about the identity theft danger. That's one of the challenges here. And that kind of goes back to the AI artist Velvet Sundown, but a voice version of it, where if the vocal DNA is so accurate that the audience can't tell the difference, the brand of the human host has a chance to lose something and be put at risk. So really a challenging thing on that. So that's one area we got to watch. As I've said before, remember, the creators take responsibility. AI doesn't take responsibility for your outputs when they're out there. So you have to be accountable when you use AI. So some things you want to think about when you are basically generating voice or music is, does it support the story or purpose? Is it consistent with your audio DNA? Are there artifacts, like weird kinds of things there? Digital artifacts, warbling, clipping. Clipping means basically the top level, just anything that gets high gets cut off a little bit. Just weird hallucinations that can happen there. Is it appropriate for where you're going to be? That's another important thing. So those are all kind of quality gates, but ethically there's some issues as well. Do you have consent? Or are you using licensed voices like the ones you have on 11 Labs? Are you trying to sound like someone? Is it too close of a copy that you're going to get in trouble for it? So you also want to be able to track the rights and usage terms for the output. And as I mentioned, you always want to disclose AI use when it's relevant. And that is week 5.